So this is a preview video of Book 15 of the Odyssey, which Emily Wilson in her translation titles The Prince Returns. The previous chapter, Odysseus returned and spent most of the chapter with the person who took care of his pigs. And here, the prince returns implies that at least some of this chapter will deal with Telemachus, who we left back in chapter 4, book 4, planning to return to his homeland after journeying to find out information about his father. And we know at the end of book 4, it ends in a scary way. The suitors are planning to attack him when he comes ashore in Ithaca. So that's where we left him. Two significant things occur in this chapter, in this book. First, Telemachus, who's still with Menelaus, asks him if he can return home to Ithaca. That's the polite, expected thing to do when someone is hosting you. It's sort of the ancient version of if you're a child and you ask to be excused from the dinner table, this is the more formal ancient version of that. And secondly, Odysseus is still conversing with the person who takes care of his swine, his pigs. And this person, Odysseus, is still in the guise of an old man. So the swineherd doesn't recognize him. So the swineherd's being totally honest, no agenda, because he doesn't know who he's talking to. So these are the two central things that happen. So at this point, it might not be bad if this poem's new to you to make some predictions. Make some predictions about Telemachus's plans and return home. Make some predictions about the continual conversation with Eumaeus. So the chapter begins, maybe somewhat predictably, with Athena, Odysseus's family's main protectress, her advice to young Telemachus. She does tell him in line 13 in book 15, quickly ask for help from Menelaus to get home. But maybe most importantly, in line 28, she kind of spoils the suspense a bit, but in doing so probably saves Telemachus's life. In line 28, she says to Telemachus, there is a gang of suitors lurking in the stream between your Ithaca and rocky Same, the next island over, who have plans to kill you on your journey home. So she basically tells him, sneak home, visit the swineherd, and she gives him sort of navigation tips to work that out. So these events occur. Telemachus asks Menelaus, if you go to line 64, so she refers to Menelaus, Telemachus refers to Menelaus as royal son of Atreus. So again, this is the very formal, respectful way to talk to leaders. And he just echoes that theme of nostalgia. He says, send me home now to my beloved country. My heart yearns to go back home. That's the essence of nostalgia, the yearning to return home. And Menelaus basically echoes that idea of Xenia, that, well, my job was to take care of you, so of course. The other job of Xenia would be to present gifts, which he does in the bottom of page 353. And he seems, Menelaus, the wealthiest man in the world, very excited. Line 103 or so. Helen stood beside the chest in which she kept the special clothes she'd worked on with her own hands. So we have goblets and bowls, and Helen made clothes. So he's really, really taken care of. And then this is my school where I teach, St. John's Prep in Danvers, Massachusetts, and our emblem is the eagle being the animal associated with St. John the Evangelist, who's our school. I think if I were to reduce this chapter to one key thing, is this idea of signs or portents or omens, predictors of the future, little pieces of surprising evidence that the future is going to occur in a certain way. So Menelaus says in line 150, remember, Telemachus is with Pisistratus. Those are the two guys that are together. Menelaus says, boys, good luck. Give Nestor my best wishes. That's where they're going next. He was always as kind as any father while we Greeks were making war at Troy. Telemachus says yes. And then in line 159, out of nowhere, then on the right, an eagle flew. Now, in this book, in this universe, an eagle appearing out of nowhere was a sign of Zeus's own presence. And a good Greek would pay really close attention to that. Then on the right, an eagle flew. It held a big white goose clutched in its claws. And what I would like you to pay attention to on the next page, in the very middle, starting in line 170, is Helen reads this prophecy. She takes this as a sign, and she says in line 170, I'm going to make a prophecy. The gods have put it in my heart. I believe it'll come true. Here's the big moment. Underline this, highlighted, stars, asterisks. Just as the eagle flew down from the mountains where he has his home with chicks and parents, seizing this tame goose. So just like the eagle came down from the mountains and seized this goose, Helen says, so will Odysseus, who's been gone so long and has endured so much, come back and take revenge. So that's her prediction. So then, if you go to line 221, this is an easy page to get lost on, so really don't worry, because we meet a new person, which means we're about to get all of his backstory, his history, his neighbors, his college major, his blood type, his social security, everything, right? Everything. Just hang in there, because no one's unimportant, right? That's the subtext of all that is Homer saying everybody has a story, right? So they come upon this guy who we learn later his name is Theoclemenus. And we learn right around line 225 on page 358, a foreigner approached him, Telemachus, who had killed a man in Argos and had run away. He was a prophet. Okay, so this is complicated. This guy is a foreigner. He's a runaway. He's a murderer. He's a prophet. So this is a complicated dude. So this reminds us of the dangers of Xenia. Some people that are alone that need your help might be sort of criminals on the run. So I would just encourage you to pay really, really close attention to the dialogue on page 358 and 359 and ask yourself, what should Telemachus do? This is dangerous, right? And his answer is in the very bottom of 359. Yes, you can join us on board our ship, and what we have is yours. You are our guest. But that's the conclusion. I want you to trace how he gets there. So that'll be something that should be discussed in a class. Now, go to line 399. I put a little funky arrow in my book because it goes from the situation of Telemachus to meanwhile, and we get to the situation of Odysseus. Because meanwhile, Odysseus was having dinner with the noble swineherd. So we're reminded of this other story. And, they're discussing plans for what should happen. And if you go to the bottom of page 361, the very last line, 341, Odysseus says, I hope Zeus loves you as I do, since you've saved me from the agonies of wandering. The worst thing humans suffer is homelessness. I'd underline that. That's worth talking about. Seems obvious, but why would that be peculiarly true in this poem, in this world? Maybe we can think about that. We must endure this life because of desperate hunger. We endure as migrants with no home. Such a powerful moment. He then asks, since you now want me to stay and wait for your young master, tell me about Odysseus' parents. His father, when he left, was on the threshold of age. And again, Odysseus is in disguise, asking Eumaeus about Odysseus' parents. And he says, asks about their parents. Are they alive still? Have they died? Watch Eumaeus' reaction. Now we know Odysseus knows his mother's fate because in book 11 in Hades, he actually talks to her ghost. He doesn't know about his father's fate. So pay attention. I would say pay attention to Eumaeus' response. And then go to line 397, because then Eumaeus gives his story. Notice there are formal poets like Antinous' poet back in the island of the Phaeacians who would tell those stories of the Trojan War. But really this epic poem reminds us that everybody is their own storyteller, their own bard, their own historian. And Eumaeus, this guy who takes care of pigs, he has a story, and Homer's quick to point that out. So starting on line 403, I would just write in the margin Eumaeus' tale and put an arrow going down. And that tale goes for the next 2.5 pages. And rather than go over it, it does have to do with slavery and a lot of difficult challenges. I would ask the question, if you end right around page 366, line 484, that's where his story ends. If you want to put a line there, I would encourage you to think about this question. Why do we get this story? Why do we get the swineherd's history? And maybe more importantly, why does Odysseus get it? You wonder, even though he's the king of Ithaca, does he know the entire history of the guy that takes care of his pigs? And why would that be important? Odysseus in disguise says in 485, Odysseus replied, "My heart is touched to hear the story of your sufferings, Eumaeus." So I think that's pretty interesting. And if you go to the final moment, they're having a discussion, and then, I'm sorry. Then you go around go back a little bit and go to line 495. Weirdly, this chapter is really weirdly constructed. We go back to Telemachus on page 366, line 495. Meanwhile, Telemachus drew near the mainland. So Telemachus lands, and this guy, this murderer prophet they picked up, Theoclymenus, says in line 509, "Where should I go?" Right? "I'm not from here." And Telemachus says in the big paragraph on 367, "Normally I'd invite you in. It's not really the ideal time right now for guests." So he encourages them to go to Eurymachus's house. He's one of the suitors. And then in line 527, there's another omen that involves birds. It says, "As he said this, a bird flew in his right, a hawk, Apollo's messenger. It clutched a pigeon in its talons. Feathers scattered between the ship and young Telemachus." So we're left to wonder, what the heck is that about? And the chapter ends, last three lines of the chapter, 555. "The boy walked quickly till he reached the farmyard. Hundreds of pigs were there, and with them slept the swineherd who knew how to help his masters." That last consonant there is important, masters, because his two masters primarily are Odysseus and Telemachus, who have seen each other since Telemachus was a baby. And maybe the central point of chapter 15 is to set the stage for them meeting. And weirdly, they're not meeting in a palace. They're not meeting in some grand environment. They're meeting sort of disguised, and they're meeting in the little area where the guy who takes care of the pigs lives. So it's really a surprising set of moments. Just some things to think about. Think about Telemachus' story right now, and think about Odysseus' story right now and so far, and how do they connect? And then maybe secondly, what should I as the reader make of the signs and portents in this chapter? And then, conversely, what should the characters in the book think? Any other question that stands out to you is great too, but I just hope this is a really weird chapter. It's weird for a lot of reasons, and I would argue it's weird because it sort of has like really forced changes, back in Ithaca, back in Pylos, back in Ithaca, just these weird changes. So hopefully this short video helps, and good luck with your reading.